was for them to have faith in Jesus Christ. You see, I believe that God was just like Santa Claus, that God was just like the Tooth Fairy, that God was just like the Easter Bunny. It was something that people made up to give themselves hope and a purpose to make their life better. I actually distinctly remember during my first job, my very first job, I worked at Burger King. Anyone ever eat at Burger King? Probably not. But that's okay. I thought it was such a great job because no one ever came to Burger King. So I just got to eat chicken fries all day long, and it was incredible. But I had this one manager, and she came in, and I knew she wasn't a believer this one day. She comes in, and she comes to me and goes, Jake, man, isn't it so crazy that if God is out there, if there is a God in this universe, that he's in control over everything? Like, you couldn't even wake up this morning without him allowing it. I remember looking at her straight back in the eyes and saying, it is so crazy that you think that. Are you serious? You actually believe in God? That is so foolish. Religion is just something that people make up to make themselves feel better, to give their lives a purpose. A few years later, during my senior year of high school, when I gave my life to Christ, I had this encounter with God that changed my life forever. One of the first things I actually did was reach back out to that manager and tell her how Jesus had changed my life and transformed my life. But I look back on my time in high school and how I was opposed to the Christian faith, how I was an atheist. And here's what I see. I let culture speak way too much into who God was in my life, into what the Christian faith was, into what Jesus was all about, his nature and who he was. I didn't allow Jesus to speak for himself. I didn't allow the church to speak on behalf of Jesus. I believe that some of you in here are in the very same boat. You've allowed culture to speak way too much into who God is and what the Christian faith is. Because here is the reality. There are tons of people that are going to give you arguments against the Christian faith, that are going to try and poke holes in our faith and the existence of God. But some of the smartest people on the face of the earth have faith in Jesus Christ. Some of the most brilliant philosophers and scientists declare that Jesus Christ is the Savior of their life. And I think too often the church is guilty of telling people to just have faith. Just trust in God. In the midst of questions and doubts and wondering where God is and who he is, I believe that the church is guilty sometimes of just saying, just trust God. Just have faith. And so here's what I want us to see in this series. That there are answers to the questions that we have. If we are willing to seek them out, if we're willing to talk to leaders and open up about where we question God, there are answers for us. During this series, I want to tackle some of the biggest questions. Night 1, 2, night, we're going to talk about why do we believe that God even exists. That's where we have to start. Why do we believe that there is a God, that God exists in our universe? Next, we're going to talk about why do we believe that God is the Christian God. Next week, we're going to talk about how Jesus compares to other gods and other religions. In week 3, we're going to talk about the resurrection, the most important part of history for our faith. You see, if you can poke a hole in the resurrection, if you can prove that the resurrection doesn't exist, we have no reason to ever gather here again. So we're going to tackle all of these questions over the next 3 weeks. And in an attempt to take back what culture has taught us about God, about the Christian faith, we're going to go into apologetics. And so our key verse for this series, it comes from 1 Peter chapter 3, verses 15 and 16. I want to read it for you right here and give you a little bit of context about what is going on in this bit of scripture. Peter is writing to some Christians, and this is what he says. But in your hearts, revere Christ as Lord. Always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you, to give a reason for the hope that you have. But do this with gentleness and respect, keeping a clear conscience, so that those who speak maliciously against your good behavior may be ashamed of their slander. You see, as Peter is writing this letter to Christians, they are in the Roman Empire, and they are literally being killed for their faith. You see, at this time, there was a man named Nero, who's the emperor of Rome, and he hated Christians. Hated Christians so much to the point where they were burning Christians at a stake, alive in the middle of this city. They were feeding Christians to hungry lions, throwing them in the lion's den. They were letting wild dogs tear them limb from limb. And Peter is writing to these Christians and saying, hey, as you see your brother or sister be murdered for their faith, this is what I'm telling you. You have to know why you believe what you believe. Always be ready to give an answer for the hope that you have in Jesus Christ in the midst of persecution. And can we just be real? That persecution, it looks a lot different for us today. Hope no one's being thrown into a lion's den. There's no one that is being torn limb from limb here in the United States, but there is persecution. And Peter's word for us tonight is, as people look at you and they wonder, why aren't you going out on a Friday night and getting drunk with all your friends? Why aren't you sleeping around with that guy or that girl? Why don't you talk like everyone else talks? You always have to be ready to give an answer for the hope that you have in Jesus Christ and why your life looks different. I want to tell us this. One thing we say so often is that the best explanation is your transformation. Right? That is the best explanation of your faith is your transformation, how Jesus has changed your life. And that's so true, but understand that is just a starting point. That is the very beginning of having a defense for your faith. There's actually great scientific reasons to believe in God. There's actually great philosophical reasons to trust in God. There's actually great arguments from morality to put your faith in Jesus Christ. Excuse me. So tonight, as we open up this series, I want to talk about 3 arguments for the existence of God. Are we ready for them? Give me a thumbs up if we're ready for them. All right, argument number 1. Everyone say Cosmological Argument. Cosmological Argument. Man, that is a mouthful right there. And I really hope that I spelled that right. Cosmological Argument. All right, so it goes like this. Whatever begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist, therefore the universe has a cause. I'm going to take this line by line and talk about what this means for us. So the first line, whatever begins to exist has a cause. That is that things don't just begin to exist from nothing, right? That's not how our universe works. We understand that when you go to a magic show and when you see a magician pull a bunny out of his hat, that bunny didn't just come out of nowhere, right? That is a magic trick. That didn't really just happen. He didn't pull a bunny out of thin air, because that's not how our universe works. If that was how our universe worked, well, then we'd see things popping up all over the place. We'd see a basketball just flying through the air. We would see $1 million just show up right on the sidewalk. Man, that would be incredible. We'd see human beings just popping up out of nowhere, right? But that's not how our universe works. It's not how our universe works. That things that cannot exist without a cause. And so we can infer that for something to exist, it needs a cause. And so the universe began to exist. Premise 2 is that the universe began to exist for centuries. You see, atheists have said that the universe has always existed, that the universe was infinite, that it had no beginning, that it had no end, that God couldn't have created the universe because the universe, it doesn't have a beginning. You can't create something that is infinite. But then in 1829, a scientist named Edwin Hubble, he made a discovery, and this is what he found by observing and tracking light from distant galaxies. He confirmed that our galaxy is expanding. Now let me explain why this is such a big deal. This is our galaxy. It's expanding. You see, for anything to expand and to grow, it has to have a starting point. Take you, for instance, you know the average human has 37.2 trillion cells inside their body. You are made up of 37.2 trillion cells. But there was a point in time where you were just one single cell. Right? You didn't just start off as a 10-year-old with 700,000 cells. You didn't just start off as a 3-year-old with 700 cells, but you started off as one singular cell. Anything that is growing, anything that is increasing, it has to be traced back to a starting point. Therefore, if the universe is expanding, the universe has to have a starting point. There has to be one point in finite history that the universe is spraying into existence. Therefore, we can incur that because anything that exists has to have a cause, and the universe began to exist, that the universe, it must have a cause. There has to have been something that caused the universe to exist. And if there was something that caused the universe to exist, it would have to be spaceless outside of space. It would have to be timeless outside of time. It would have to be immaterial, not made from anything on this universe. It would have to be uncaused. It would have to be something that is eternal. Does that sound like something that we know? The Christian God that we learn about in the Bible, the God that we serve outside of time, outside of space, immaterial and eternal. It sounds like the God that we read about in the Bible. The first argument that we have is the Cosmological Argument. We understand that something cannot come from nothing. Our universe was created, and it didn't just happen. The universe didn't just create itself, right? Something that does not exist cannot create itself. So our universe has to have a cause. That's the first argument, the Cosmological Argument. Argument number 2. Everyone say teleological argument. Teleological argument. Man, these are some mouthfuls. All right, teleological argument right here, number 2. I'm going to read just a couple of equations that make up the very structure of our universe. Number 1, the Higgs vacuum expectation value. Number 2, the mass of up-down strange quark. The mass of the electron, the strong nuclear force, coupling constant, the cosmological constant, and there are so many more. Now, I understand you probably have no idea what any of those equations are, but let me explain it to you like this. These are the equations that make up the very fabric of the universe that we live in. You see, without these equations, our universe cannot exist, and science has even discovered that if these numbers, if these equations were altered by even 1 over 10 to the 60th power, that is 1 over 10 with 60 zeros behind it. Take the weight of gravity, the gravitational pull of the universe. If any number in the gravitational pull of the universe was off by just 1 and over 10 to the 60th power, then life on the universe could not exist. Either the universe would expand too rapidly and it would implode on itself, or it would crumble back onto itself. It could not sustain life if any of these numbers were off by just a hair. And the gravitational pull is just one equation of literally thousands and thousands and thousands of equations that are fine-tuned so perfectly to support life on this earth. Stephen Hawking, a famous atheist and one of the most brilliant theoretical physicists, said this: "The remarkable fact is that the values of these numbers seem to have been very finely adjusted to make possible the development of life." You see, even people who do not believe in God, they have to admit that in the face of this evidence, and it points to something outside of our universe that has created everything. Even people who do not acknowledge God and do not believe in God, they admit that in the way the numbers are, the way the data is, it just points to something outside of our universe that is controlling everything. And so we have to answer the question, is this just done by chance? All these equations line up perfectly and fine-tuned perfectly. Is this just by chance? Well, let's talk about the chances of this happening by chance. You see, the chances of the universe being created the way it is and being able to sustain life are 1 in over 10. And if you started putting zeros behind the 10 right here, you could go all the way to the moon with zeros behind it and then back. And that represents the chances of the universe simply being created the way that it is, able to sustain life. I'm telling you, you look at this. I look at this as a Christian. This is why I say it takes so much more faith to be an atheist in the face of this data and these numbers than it does to be a Christian, to actually believe in a God who created the heavens and the earth and everything in it. The most logical conclusion would be that God did create the heavens and the earth just like Genesis describes him is doing. So argument number one, the cosmological argument that something came from nothing, and that's not how our universe works. Something doesn't just come from nothing without being caused. Our universe has to have a cause. It has to have a creator. Argument number two, the teleological argument. Our universe is fine-tuned in such a way that for you to believe that this just happened by chance is astronomically wild. It is way more crazy to believe that these numbers just happened to be than to believe that God actually created the heavens and the earth and fine-tuned everything perfectly to exist the way that it does. Argument number three, the argument from morality. This is where I want to wrap up tonight, and this is where I want to spend just a minute here talking to you. You know, one of the most common defenses against the Christian faith, one of the hardest things for most people who do not believe in God to grasp is how could there be a good God that is all-powerful and still be evil in the world? It just doesn't make sense, right? Either God has to be all-powerful and not good because there is evil in the world, or God has to be all good and not powerful enough to take that evil away. There's a man named C.S. Lewis who did not believe in God, and he tried to solve this question, and he tried to make a defense against Christianity with this question. And he actually ended up becoming a Christian through trying to poke holes in the Christian faith, and this is how that happened. You see, for there to be good and evil in the world, there has to be objective moral values. Right? There has to be truth in the world for there to be good and evil, and for there to be objective moral values, there has to be an ultimate good. There has to be a reference point. When I think about this, I think about when I first moved to North Carolina, right? So I am from Michigan, I'm from Detroit, and the really sad thing about Michigan is that I know, I say Detroit weird, it's okay. The weird thing about Michigan, they don't have chicken biscuits up north. I know, right? Like, that's terrible, that's heartbreaking. I don't know how anyone would survive up there. I don't know how I survived up there. But I came down to North Carolina, and I remember I was running late for school one morning. I'll never forget this morning. I'm running late for school, and my mom says, okay, we're just going to go up to McDonald's and you can get some breakfast. And I see this thing on the menu, and it says a chicken biscuit. I'm like, what the heck is a chicken biscuit? That sounds delicious. And I ordered it, and it changed my life forever. When I tell you, man, I did not know what I was missing for so long, not having chicken biscuits in my life. I got that McChicken, that little dollar McChicken biscuit from McDonald's, and I thought it was the best thing ever, right? Then, like, maybe 2-3 weeks later, I discovered what Bojangles was. Right? So I discovered that beautiful, fluorescent orange awning, and I walked inside for the very first time. I smelled that Cajun seasoning, and I ordered a Cajun filet chicken biscuit. And I was ready to throw every McChicken biscuit that I ever tried in the trash, right? Because a Cajun filet biscuit is so much better. I wish Trey was here, because that man loves a McChicken biscuit, but that's all right. Cajun filet biscuits are way better. So here's what I discovered, right? I had to have an objective reference point. I had to have a standard of perfection for me to rate other chicken biscuits. Does that make sense? Right? Once I had this Cajun filet biscuit, the best biscuit, if you disagree with me, we can argue about this later. I finally had something I could compare other biscuits to and decided they were good chicken biscuits. Likewise, in this world, you cannot say that there is good and evil in the world, that there is not an ultimate standard of perfection. Because without it, it's just whatever I think is good. Like, can we just be real? If I think that killing a human being is okay and good, then that's fine. If there is no objective reference point, if God does not exist, then that is okay. But there's a reason that we can look at stuff like that and decide, no, it is wrong to murder, it is wrong to steal. Those things are bad because they go against the character of God. They go against the character of the one who is the standard of perfection. And likewise, we can look at things like love and kindness and forgiveness and decide that these things are inherently good because they match the character of our God, who is the standard of perfection. You see, the argument of morality is that there can be no good and evil in the world, that there is no God in the world. And yet you and I, we have this inherent sense of things that are wrong. No one has to tell you that it is wrong to discriminate against other people. No one has to tell you that it is wrong to hurt other people. You know that it is wrong because there is a God who exists, and it is against his character. And so, to recap, argument number one, the cosmological argument that something came from nothing, and that's not how our universe works. Things don't just come from nothing. They have to be created. They have to have a cause. And we believe that cause is our God creating the universe, just like it says in Genesis. Argument number two, the teleological argument, the fact that our universe is so finely tuned with thousands and thousands of equations that for you to believe that that just happened, the chances of that are so astronomically small. It takes so much more faith to believe in chance than it does to believe in a God who created everything. Lastly, the argument of morality. Without God, there is no good or evil in the world. And you and I, we have a sense of good and evil. And so even people that do not believe in God, we have fingerprints that point to the fact that God exists in our world, that there is a creator. Tonight we covered three of literally hundreds and possibly thousands of arguments for the Christian faith in the world, but we covered a lot of information. This is what I want to leave you with tonight as we go into breakout groups in just a minute. I want to talk about a couple things. First off, no one was ever argued into heaven. Like we understand that no one was ever argued into the Christian faith. The point of us going through this series is not so that you can go to school tomorrow and Jesus juke all your friends. The point of us going through this series is not so that you can go to school and make someone look stupid and sound like the smartest person in your class. The point of us going through this series is that Peter says, you better be ready to give a defense for the faith that you have in Jesus Christ. And I feel like as the church, we are too guilty of saying, just have faith. Just trust in God blindly. There are very legitimate answers to the questions and the doubts that you have and the people outside of this room who do not believe in God have. There are very, very real answers if you're willing to seek them out and find them. If you're willing to look for those answers. So in a minute, we're going to go into breakout groups, and here's what I want us to do. I got two tasks for us in breakout groups. The first one, I want us to just have a very real and raw conversation about why we have hope in Jesus Christ. If someone were to go to you tonight and say, why do you believe in Jesus? What would you say to them? Can I just say, if you have no idea, that's okay. Just say that. If you don't believe in God, if you're hearing your question, I don't even know if God exists, that's okay. And I'm so glad you're here. But just be honest about that. This is a place where you can belong before you believe in God, but better believe that we're going to change that, and we're going to show you who God is. So I want us to have a real conversation about why we have hope in Jesus Christ. What is our current defense for our faith? And secondly, every group is going to have a couple slips of paper. And I want everyone to take a paper, whether you have been following Jesus for 100,000 years, or if you have never followed Jesus for one day in your life. I want you to write down, what are your biggest questions about God? If you could ask God anything, if there's anything that's hanging you up in your faith, if there's anything that you question, if you want to know anything, what would it be? Write down those questions, and we want to do our best to answer those questions. And can I just say, don't let this be just a this week thing. We want Radiant to be a place where you feel comfortable coming to our leaders and opening up in breakout groups when you have questions, when you have doubts. Because can I be honest that as a Christian, you're going to have doubts. I have questions. I have doubts. If you don't have questions and doubts, I question if you are even a Christian, if you're following God. So now I want you to write down one question that you have, one hang-up that you have in your faith. And Corey and I next week are going to do our best to answer some of those questions and do them justice. And so we're going to head